History 12 Final Project. Which Allied country contributed the most economically, militarily, or politically in World War II? How did Britain contribute? The beginning of the war. Britain joined the war September 3, 1939, because of the failed appeasement of Germany. At the start of the war, Britain's expeditionary force had 683,000 men, and by October 11, 1939, 158,000 men had been transported to France to fight. The British Navy was the strongest in the world and had more strength than its German counterpart. There were 9 Britain divisions ready for war at this time. Significant battles. The Battle of Britain. This is a battle in the skies of Britain between the RAF and the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe had a 3-to-1 advantage to the RAF. This was the Nazis' final attempt to defeat Fighter Command and clear the way for invasion. Gilbert Taylor. The battle lasted through the summer and fall of 1940. Britain had advanced radars. The Spitfire plane and the Hawker Hurricane fighter. North Africa, El Alamein. This is a battle between Britain, the Desert Rats, and Rommel's troops. The Germans and Italians for North Africa. The British won the battle and pushed the enemy to retreat 1,000 miles across North Africa. The battle lasted from October 23rd to November 11th, 1942. Southern Africa is not a sideshow, but a vital area of the empire. Ashley Jackson. The conclusion of the war. By the end of World War II, 2.9 million men had served in the British Army. 300,000 British died or were wounded, with 180,488 made prisoners of war. The British Expeditionary Force constituted of 10% of the Allied defending force. In Britain's defeats, the foundation of its imperial system was diminished. Economic contributions. Before the start of World War II, Britain had been going through a depression, like many other nations. Britain was highly successful for mobilizing their home front in the war by assembling the greatest proportion of potential workers. Much of the success was because of the planned mobilization of working women. This was enforced after December 1941. Industrial production was geared towards munitions, and Britain became the center of the Allied forces in Europe. Political contributions. As the war started, Britain and fellow Allied nations needed Western assistance and were helpful to persuade those resource-rich colonies to provide them with men and resources for the war. Prior to the war, Neville Chamberlain attempted to appease Germany. After the appeasement failed and the war started, Churchill was elected into Parliament. In 1939, Britain controlled 25% of the world's population and 30% of the world's landmass. The after effects of World War II left Britain from having 700 million men to 5 million in their empire outside the UK. Britain would survive the war, but the price to pay would be the loss of its empire. Ashley Jackson.
How did Canada contribute? Military contributions. Canada entered the war on September 10, 1939. Canada was the primary location for the BCATP. The BCATP was one of the single largest air training programs. It trained 131,500 personnel for the Allies. Canada fought in almost every theater of war. Some major battles were Hong Kong, Ortano, Italy, and the Juno Beach D-Day landings. Canada fought Japanese forces when Japan attacked the British Crown colony of Hong Kong, and it was one of the first battles of the Pacific War. In Italy, Canadians fought Germans in the town of Ortano. Brutal close-quarter combat happened like in Stalingrad. It was the accumulation of fighting on the Adriatic front. On Juno Beach, the 3rd Infantry Division took heavy losses, but in the end took control of the beach. Economic contributions. The Royal Canadian Navy started from scratch and grew to 700 ships with 95,000 men and took over more and more Allied convoy work and had took most of it by 1944. Canada's convoys completed over 25,000 trips across the Atlantic, bringing over metals, lumber, food, and other resources Britain looked overseas for, and also convoy supplies to Murmansk in the USSR. Canada gave almost $4 billion in financial aid to the United Kingdom. Political contributions. Britain declaring war didn't automatically commit Canada to the war, but Canada joined Britain in a matter of days. William Lyon Mackenzie King was the Prime Minister of Canada and helped keep the French and English populations in Canada united. Mackenzie provided a lot of support to Britain and other Commonwealth countries.
How did the USSR contribute?
Russia was first involved in the war when they invaded Poland with Germany on September 17, 1939.
Bad boy, what you want to do? When the shirt and brown comes for you, tell me what you want to do. Yeah.
Prior to this, Germany had signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, which was later broken by Hitler when the Nazis attacked Russia on June 22, 1941. On this day, Stalin with the Soviet Union joined the Allies. The front was 2,000 miles long with 2,680,000 Soviet soldiers along the front lines.
The Battle of Moscow and Leningrad were both significant battles in World War II.
Russian battle tactics.
Boom. Boom.
The first significant battle, Moscow. The Battle of Moscow started on October 2nd, 1941, when the Nazis advanced through Russia, approaching the capital of Moscow. The cold winter assisted the Soviets in their defense of Moscow. It was the coldest winter in 50 years, almost reaching negative 50 degrees Celsius. The Germans were not prepared for the extreme cold and had trouble transporting winter supplies to the front. The Soviets were also prepared for the attack. They set up a strategic defense and included counterattacks to deny Germans. The battle ended on January 7, 1942, when the Russians counterattacked the Germans, pushing them back and ending the German advance into Moscow. Over 1 million Soviet lives were lost. The second significant battle, Leningrad. The Battle of Leningrad began on September 8, 1941, when the Nazis surrounded the city of Leningrad. There were 3 million Red Army soldiers trapped until 1943, when they opened a hole in the German line to allow supplies to come in and civilians to evacuate. By January 27, 1944, Soviet relief pushed back the Nazis, ending the German advance into Russia. Political contributions. On August 23, 1939, Germany and Russia signed a non-aggression pact to prevent conflict between the two nations. Throughout the duration of World War II, Joseph Stalin was the dictator. As Hitler conducted the invasion of Russia, Stalin went into hiding, but later came back and assisted with turning the war tide to the Russians with his brilliant war strategies. Stalin was also appointed himself in control of his country's war effort in 1942. Economic contributions. Prior to the beginning of World War II, Stalin managed to industrialize the Soviet Union and catch up with the rest of the world. Russia produced over 22,000 tanks by 1941, which was more than all of the tanks produced in every other nation in World War II combined. Unfortunately for Russia, Stalin's scorched earth policy and the Germans' destruction of Soviet cities left 32,000 factories destroyed and 17,000 towns in rubble. In total, Russia spent about $192 billion on World War II, and it lost around 1/4 of its population of 1 million people.
The Near-End War. Military. The United States joined the fight December 7, 1941, after a devastating attack on Pearl Harbor from Axis-powered Japan, in hopes to crumble America's Navy as quickly as possible. In total, 16 million men contributed, making them the second largest army next to Russia, who was the first. D-Day. Americans stationed 156,000 soldiers on the beaches of Normandy, June 6, 1944, and lost 2,499 lives, KIA. This happened so they could liberate France from the Nazis. Economic contribution to
the U.S. America by far contributed the most economically. America was contributing through the Lend-Lease Act before they were involved, supplying the Allies with weapons, ammo, food, and motorized vehicles. They sent over $50 billion worth of goods to Allied countries. Political. America was suffering from the Great Depression. America elected Franklin D. Roosevelt, who got the country out of the Depression. Roosevelt sent men to fight and put women in the factories, supporting the war effort. Roosevelt gave political and financial support to Britain, China, and the USSR. Conclusion. Economically, we think that the U.S. contributed the most. Because of how many resources and supplies they gave to the Allies, they gave 18 million tons of supplies through the Lend-Lease Act in just 2 years of support throughout the war effort. They also gave tens of billions of dollars worth of goods to Allied countries. They provided 185,000 aeroplanes, 120,000 tanks, around 6,792,000 guns, artillery, and motors, and 54,932 ships, 47 billion small rounds of ammunition.
Militarily. In conclusion to the military contributions, we believe the USSR contributed the most because of the sheer numbers of men they gave to the war effort, with 25 million lives lost, which is a quarter of the Russians' population. 10 million of the lives lost were soldiers.
Politically, we believe Britain contributed the most to World War II because of its persuasive abilities to convince other Allied countries to assist in the war efforts, as well as sacrificing its empire to defeat the Axis power.